episode of the Legacy Gambit. Today, Sarah, we're finally doing a learning legacy after 2 months, and we can actually talk to people about the fun formats and playing Magic, and it's going to be great because we have a guest. We have our wonderful Andreas Petersen, also known as ecobaronenMTG, on the channel today, talking about something that I think, Sarah, me and you are really passionate about, which is playing with purpose, learning mindsets, and generally how to get better without worrying about results. Because, folks, let's not worry about results. Results really do not matter. But we'll get into that in a minute. But firstly, Andreas, introduce yourself to everyone. You've been on the channel before, kicked our ass, Legacy. But tell people who you are, basically.
Yeah, that's a good memory of mine, getting to beat you in Legacy, first of all. So I'm just gonna soak that in just a little bit. But no, my name is Andreas. I'm a Magic player from Denmark. I've been playing cards for way over half of my life. I started with the Pokemon trading card game. Then I started to play Magic, and I haven't looked back since. So I have around 20 years under my belt as we speak. So lots of experiences to hopefully share a little bit about. And yeah, I'm curious where the conversation takes us today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And of course, I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Sarah. Sarah, we're ready to chat the wizard squares and fun legacy ditties.
You know me, I always want to talk about wizard squares. I always want to talk about how to get good with wizard squares, which is much harder than anything else, I think. Yeah, cool. So let's get everything on the road, I think. So Sahar's already mentioned playing with purpose as a phrase. And I think it's one of those like little snippets where everyone's heard of, oh, you should play with purpose, you should. But let's kind of get into what this actually means and kind of like how to actually apply it to how you play Magic. So,
yeah, it's definitely a broad definition and not like a term that's getting thrown around. But for me, playing with a purpose is basically just whenever you take the subway to the tournament or you turn on your computer, you have to know like why, what's driving you there, what are you looking to accomplish. This can be seeing your friends, this can be getting better at a certain deck, this can be learning a new format. But if you define like what your purpose is, it's just going to be a way more successful experience most of the time, in my opinion. And I think especially with a game like Magic, where we're like on the edge of addiction with the, I guess that's really what I'm talking about. Like we kind of have to define why are we doing it, because it can become a habit and it can become a bad habit also. We have seen numerous examples of that, like, oh, I have some spare time, I should probably play, but why is that? So it's basically just digging deeper and finding out why am I playing this game, and the answer can vary a lot. Like that's my definition of it.
Cool. Yeah. So that's kind of like what people would usually term like the macro level of playing with purpose. It's kind of like the overall holistic style of doing it. Do you also apply that to like the micro level? Do you think about like exactly why you're making specific game actions, or is it mostly a macro level thing?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's actually a good point. Of course, you can do a lot of like, you can, for instance, you can review your games. Like I have a friend in the midweek, we sometimes review our games from the weekend because first of all, I'm sure there's always going to be things to learn, no matter if you lost or won a game. You can sit with a feeling of, I think I could have done a better job here. But you also need to kind of detach yourself emotionally from the game. And then after a few days, maybe you forgot about the details, but that's just great in my opinion, because that just means that you're not on the tail end of an 8-hour tournament making these decisions. You're like viewing it with a fresh mind. So yeah, definitely looking for stuff like that is also, then you're not playing with a purpose, but you're kind of reviewing your game. You're looking to get better at the game with that purpose. So for sure, that's also something I can recommend.
Yeah, so it's kind of like viewing like various things you do to do with the game as part of playing it, I guess, is a way you can look at that.
Yeah, so you can go into detail about the specific game, or you can think about it in general of why am I spending my spare time, digging into this game, because you can, and I always say in my language, I don't know if it translates, you can inhale magic in numerous ways. Like, you can play it, you can read about it, you can think about it, you
Yeah.
can, like, there's numerous ways to like do this hobby.
Yeah.
So, but it has to have a purpose, I would say.
Yeah. I want to just pop back to your point about addiction, because folks may know that I am a sort of video games researcher, and addiction is a big part of why people play games. And you definitely see players who, and I've heard accounts by players who are just playing because they don't know, because there's nothing else to do. You can play for escapism, that's fine, but as soon as, especially with Magic Online, and you can definitely see it with someone like the MODO grinders, that's their identity, that's the thing they latch onto. So when they're playing too much and they don't recognize it, it becomes very addictive. And you can, and I think that's resonant, in all the video games generally, but I think with Magic, because you can kind of go, oh, I want to get, all right, you can kind of veil it in terms of like, oh, well, I'm playing because I'm trying to get better. And it's like, well, no, that's just, when does it become unhealthy? And I think that there's a lot of players who I've seen, especially on Twitter, who have caught themselves and they're like, I can't play this much because it becomes a downward spiral. And then there are players who are in that spiral who, you're just like, okay, well, you're there now.
Yeah.
If you figure it out, like if this is how the life you want to live, great. But if you're not having like a healthy approach to the game in that way,
yeah, it's super tough, because looking yourself in the mirror is super tough, and even like confronting your friends is tough. Confronting strangers is even more tough, right?
Yeah.
So it's just also a lot of taboo to do, like when you're on that side of when you're like flirting with the addiction.
Yeah.
It's super tough, I think.
Yeah.
I
I've seen
think-
friends. Sorry, Sarah, you were saying.
I was going to say, there's some like interesting things you said that I think we can dig into here. So the first one is kind of like, how do you identify that you're not acting with purpose, and kind of what to do from that point? Because you might be able to identify it, but knowing actually what to do about it is a secondary thing. And the other point you made that was interesting, because I kind of have a different perspective on it that I want to drill into, is the identity question. Because I remember in chess, did chess coaching for a while, dealt with chess, played chess for many, many years. It was actually like part of how you motivated yourself to take the game seriously and get up and do your daily practice. A lot of people did that via identity, right? Yeah. They talked to themselves and went, well, I'm a chess player, this is what chess players do. Mm-hmm. And that was like a useful, motivating, habit building thing that was usually looked upon very positively. So it seems like we have like two different ways this can go, right? Where your identity can stop you doing what you want to do, or your identity can be like a motivating factor towards what you want to do. So do you think there's any signs of like which one's which? Is there a way that we can turn one into the other one?
That's great point, first of all, because I do agree. I've also known people, and for myself, it was actually a driving factor. I wanted to play at the Pro Tour level someday. So that made me put in the extra hours because I was motivated. It helped my discipline to get to a level where I can reasonably expect to qualify at some point. So I think you can both argue that was a positive driving force, but you can also argue that I maybe didn't make the best life decisions when it came to priorities at the time, right? I think the answer to that question is very individual. For someone, it will be, that was the reason why I decided to not get lazy with my hobby and take it seriously, and that elevated my level, while they kept a good balance of, social life, work, family, whatever it is. But for some, once it starts hurting those areas specifically, it's going to be a negative thing. So I think it's a great point that for some it's going to be a great driving force, and for others it's going to be like an avalanche or a cascade of bad things happening, basically. So yeah, great point. I definitely agree. It's a double-edged sword.
So it feels like it's kind of like a question of means and balance, right?
Yeah,
Like,
balance is like my favorite word when it comes to Magic. Like that's just the
Please
most.
have balance.
Yeah, it's just the most important thing, because I think if you only do Magic, I don't think you're like human wise, well rounded wise, you're not in a good place.
Yeah.
But if you're doing great in your like social life, work or school or whatever you do, and then I think it can also enhance your like performance in Magic, and vice versa. It's supposed to give you energy, not like drain energy.
Who said that? That's a lie. No, I'm kidding. That it should be the case. But the amount of players who you talk to them, they're like, "Oh, I'm so tired." I'm like, "Isn't this meant to be something you choose to do?" And they're like, "Who said that?" I'm like, it's like asking Magic players how much money they've spent on the game. They're like, just don't. It's a sunk cost of fallacy. We don't ask the question anymore. I actually wanted to ask you because I remember you, Andres, when I was starting out, like going to GPs and stuff, and you were like, you with like Michael Bonder and Thomas Evelson, like constantly like at the top levels and like doing well. But like over the years, you've like transitioned like to playing online majoritively.
Yeah.
Was that like a choice for you? Is that like a balanced choice of like, okay, like this is one part of my life. Now I've moved on to another part of my life in terms of like playing with purpose of like this was me before X and this is me now, and like I'm happy with the choices I've made? Or are you still like, oh, I would like to go back to the Pro Tour one day and like put that grind in or what have you?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told you about this, but I guess we can take it now.
Yeah.
I used to travel to like 8 or 10 GPs each year, and that was like my identity. So
Yeah.
whenever I could get time off work, I would like travel on Friday, get back Monday, and I would just play all of these because my friends did it, right?
Yeah.
But then at some point in 2017, I was at GP Las Vegas, and I qualified for day two. But when the alarm clock rang, I didn't feel like going, so I stayed in the room. I didn't show up to day two, and I realized this was taking too much of a toll, like the traveling, um, all the like booking hotels, flights, etc. All of that stuff just took too big of a toll, and I I still loved Magic, but I didn't like the package that kind of came with it at the time. So that's when I decided to not do that anymore, and find my like be faithful to the reasons why I still love the game, but not compromise other stuff while pursuing it. If that makes sense. So Magic Online is just the perfect answer for me. I get the same kick out of turning on my computer as I get to traveling to Prague and play at Legacy Eternal Weekend. So at that point, I guess I shouldn't be traveling for Magic 10 times a year if that's the case, right?
And it's different. I think everyone, and I've spoken to people who like it's what's your driving factor? Like for me, like Magic Online is a tool and I appreciate it. But I go and I think you said at the start, why did you go and play events? It's like I also the social aspect is important to me.
Yeah.
The gathering's the best part. Like Magic is great, but the gathering is why we all go.
Yeah.
And I think like if I think that's sort of, I'm still probably doing like 4 or 5 events a year, but they are peppered with, I'm going to see friends or I'm connecting with people or networking and doing stuff for the channel, all this kind of stuff. And I think like everyone's drivers are different, but I think that I actually do think gone are the days where I knew a bunch of British players, and Sarah, I'm sure you will have also, who would go to every single every single European GP 3 week, like 2 to 3 weekends a month, and it was just like Friday, Monday, and like that was their life, and that I think it's kind of healthy that that's not the case anymore. But then people go, oh, I missed that time. And I'm like, do you miss that time or do you just miss competing? Because they are two different things and you can still get those kicks, for want of a better phrase, like elsewhere, whether it's free Magic Online or on a more sort of local and regional level.
Yeah. It's
Because
so when people say they miss those times, they could just be talking about some parts of it, right? So
yeah,
if I
yeah,
were to talk about it, I miss the times where I would like have this super close camaraderie with like Thomas and Michael
yeah.
specifically. That was just the best. We played on Team Vintage Super League, Team Modern Super League. We were like the inseparable unit. I
Yeah,
miss
yeah.
those times for sure. I actually messaged them this Christmas, just kind of randomly. Hey guys, I just want to let you know I really appreciated the times we had with Magic. I realized we're, oh,
Oh,
yeah, we're now at every each of us, we're at different stages of our life, so we can't hang out as much as we used to. But that means a lot, and that fueled me for sure. Just having two great friends, better players than me, and then just staying hungry and so that was like a way for me to work harder, right?
Yeah, I remember when I first started playing, and you guys were doing like team, like VSL and MSL, and I just was like, I mean, one of my favorite moments. I think I've not spoken about the channel, but I've definitely spoken about this privately. One of my favorite moments of modern Super League is Andreas scape shifting, like top decking scape shift, and Brad Nelson losing his absolute mind. And I am like, as a scape shift player, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, that's a great moment.
Like, it's like, as a scape shift player, it just like burns like what little ember there is for me to still cast this 4-mana sorcery. Like, I look at that like once a year, I'm like, one day we can still do that and we can feel things once again. But for now, let's remember Ragavan exists in modern. But yeah, like, and I just remember like seeing like the three of you at GPs, and you guys just like constant like. I remember when I picked up Legacy, and like Thomas playing Death and Taxes at like such an insane level, and you're like, holy like they're just you three were like very well revered, and it's I mean, like they're obviously at different stages, like you said, you're at different stages of your life, but I think it's interesting when you speak to people who were doing that, and now post like the pandemic, I think a lot of people reevaluated what purpose and priorities mean.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting now, seeing some of the younger players come up and you see how hungry they are, and you're like, I don't want to kind of be like the joys of youth, but when you're 19, you have no responsibilities. You can just play Magic. It's like, Sarah, do you remember being 19 and just playing Magic? That's all.
Well, I was like super broke at 19, so my Magic was very, very different. My Magic at 19 was winning a lot of limited events and like slowly turning that into cards. I don't think like I played like competitive constructed until I was like 25. Yeah. And I was playing like constantly for the limited streets anyway. Like I remember having a ridiculous season during like Dragons Limited, Shadows over Innistrad Limited. I don't think I lost a store draft that entire season. I top 8'd a bunch of PPTQs. Basically everything that ran sealed. Even though that was not a good sealed format. That was a very weird sealed It
was very weird. Yeah, I think I started playing competitive Magic like 26. Yeah, so like 26 until I was in this like my early to like my sort of 32, 33. And then COVID happened, and then I was like, I just no. It's like, why do I want to? COVID's happened. I can't play competitive Magic.
Yeah, that was like a natural way. So let's see, 2017. I kind of realized this traveling thing is not for me. But then at that time, I had already booked a couple of team GPs, and Faith would have it that we placed second in Madrid or something. So we qualified for the 25th anniversary PT, which was also teams.
Yeah, I love that PT.
Yeah, that was like the best tournament I've ever played. Like the atmosphere was just so good. We got a lot of like cool stuff, cool playmats and stuff. They really like did a good job of making this tournament special. Yeah. So that felt like a good farewell tournament, I would say, for like taking Paper Magic serious for me.
I really think games like Magic need more team events, just in general. Like, there is such a motivating factor, even in what should be a one-on-one game in the abstract, to just have a team. Yeah. This is really constant in chess as well. Like, chess team leagues are like the standard until then you have individual tournaments as well. But the thing that gets you up and playing every single week is going to be the team league. And the motivation of just having more people where you're all just trying to perform in that league. The motivation's just incredible. Like, it gets you through those like difficult parts of like losing motivation, because you're like, well, I have to do this work. My team needs me to perform. But of course that can also put a lot of pressure on some people. So it's again like a very individualistic thing.
Yeah.
But for me, it is so much easier to put work in a team environment because I know they're working, and so I want to work too. You get that
Definitely.
kind of like
We're social
reinforcement.
creatures after all. And
Hmm.
what one argument against the team, like in professional Magic, team aspect in professional Magic, is what about, let's say there's a team PT, but you have a qualified number of players that isn't divided by three, or you're
Hmm.
a random guy from Alaska with no network within Magic, but you qualify via Magic Online. Like,
Yeah.
what are you going to do in that case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I also appreciate that argument. Actually, we had a tough time finding a third for the PT, because one of our players wanted to play with another team. Understandably so; those were big players at the time. So we were two guys. We qualified as a like a three people team, but we needed to find one more player. Like, that was stressful, and we have
Yeah.
a great network. So I can just imagine having no network, and then
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I can see both sides of that coin,
Yeah.
but I do agree. Team tournaments are the best. Win as a team, lose as a team. That's
Team.
just
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, I definitely think like the Pro Tour is like the pinnacle of like individual Magic in my mind. But I could see like
Like the
it's
World Magic
difficult.
Cup. I like the World Magic Cup for that. It's like a
Yeah,
nice balance in the middle where
Yeah,
you're coming as a country and you get to work together. I think that's the compromise potentially.
yeah. It's there's no real nice analog for Magic from chess, but in chess, the way it tends to work is you get into chess because you join a club, right?
Yep.
You play for a team in that club. There will be club leagues. And then, because you're taking it seriously at that point, people in your club would be like, hey, we're all going to travel to this individual tournament. Do you want to tag along? We'll get drinks in between rounds. We'll hang out in the pub. You get all that kind of like gathering thing. And because you're already doing it every week because you have these team events, you want to do the individual events as well. All your friends are going to be there. So,
Yeah.
like, the only equivalent in Magic that I could think of would be if someone started, like, a team league thing. Like, it wouldn't even need to be, like, Wizards official. You see this on chess websites all the time. Like, Lichess runs an unofficial Bundesliga that isn't, like, connected to the German chess Bundesliga. It's just an online chess version of the same thing. And
That's fair.
honestly, I feel like there could be space for that in Magic in the future, like more kind of like team-based events where you and just like two or three buddies just are like, we're a team, there's a team league.
I think
Honestly, now I kind of just want to make that. I want to
yeah,
make that
it's also
happen.
like what formats are like. I think it's easier for limited than it is for constructed. I think like there are some people who do it for like testing teams. Like I think that's the level that kind of revolves around like when
yeah,
people are testing for the
that's a good
RC.
one. Testing teams is like a way to make Magic, which is by definition an individual sport, but make it into a team sport.
Yeah,
You have reasons to root for other people. I used to do that when I traveled to GPs. When I got knocked out, I would be like the water boy, or bringing sandwiches, or
yeah,
doing
100%.
neck massages. That would be me, right? Because then I'm still invested. And
Yeah, yeah,
my friends told me like years down the line that was just invaluable. Like, that
yeah.
was insane. Instead of crying in a corner, I was like still in the tournament, right? Because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were in the tournament.
I remember going to PT Barcelona, PT Lord of the Rings in Barcelona. I'm not qualified, but I have a bunch of friends who are, and I turn up and I see Sean Goddard and a bunch of the Brits, like Marco Del Pivo, bless him, and I'm like, boys, I'm doing my daily mum check. Are you hydrated? They're like, yes, we've got water. I said, have you got snacks? They're like, yes, we've got snacks. I'm like, are you still hydrated? I'm like, yes. And then I will ask them how they're doing. And then I will ask them about their results. Because you have to check. I call it the mum check. I did it at the RC again. I was like, mum check. They're like, yes, Sahar. I'm like, and they're like, or they're deciding their deck choices. I'm like, okay, I will like pick up their 75 or I'll pick up their sideboard and I'll be like, okay, I think this deck is for this matchup. And they'll go, yes. I'll be like, this deck is for this matchup. They go, yes. They go, this is for this matchup. And then I'm like, okay, why are you worried? And they're like, because they're fretting before they submit. And they're like, why are you worried? They're like, oh yeah, good point. I'm like, pick your deck up. And like, because, I mean, again, I am older than a lot. With peace and love to the magic grinders, I am probably old. I am probably the age of to be some of their mums, or at least like their older sister, because I'm old. But I feel like sometimes you just need to have that discipline to kind of go, it's fine. And I've seen other players do it. Like I think when Jujubin won Eternal Weekend.
Which one of them?
Which one? I mean, yeah, the Eternal Weekend in Prague. I know, like Lee Webb was like his like back. He was like his like boy and like supporting him and things like that.
For sure.
You need
Shout
those.
out Hank.
Shout out Hank. We love. He's not called Hank, nor is he obese, but we love him nevertheless. But you need those people, and I think it's so important. Sarah did it for me. Sarah does it for me at events. Like I've
never seen you calm down more quickly than the time I came over to you panicking about your sideboard. I just went, "It's with God now, chill." And
I was like, "It is with God." Packed my deck and went to round one. I was just like, it's
this is actually a good example of how your like behavior in Magic imitates life. Like it's
so
not
true.
It's not basically we're just saying right now the too long didn't read is you should support your friends. It's not like rocket science, but it's for some reason because Magic is an individual game on the surface.
Yeah,
it's not the most logic thing to be doing. I think that's
100%.
I think that's my take on it.
The thing to the people who only think in logic that I want to frame this to them in is even if we want to think on like realms of pure logic, right? That brain power that you're using to stress about your sideboard card 20 minutes before the event is brain power you're not going to have for round one.
Yeah, 100%.
And that 15th sideboard card isn't going to make a bigger difference than being well rested for round one. It just never will.
Yeah. As much as we all like to believe it does, it doesn't.
Or round 8.
Or round 10. 8. Like, or top 8. You're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Getting a coffee and doing some breathing exercises are going to be bigger EV than not doing that.
Sarah said the magic words. We said the EV phrase. People love EV. Actually, on the actually a point on this, Andreas, is there certain like methods you do to like check yourself when you're like, when you're, about like the gathering, or you're like trying to like, that you're trying to make sure that you're like in the zone, or you're like working on it and like you're in that mindset? Is that stuff you do to check yourself on it, or is it just like I've just conditioned myself after years and years of playing that I know that like regardless of what happens, if I'm doing well, amazing. If I'm not, then I can support my friends. Or is it something that you have to continually be like, I need to do this and stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely harder when I'm doing well, which may not sound logic, but let's say I have like an insane weekend, right?
Yeah.
I play some tournaments. I do way above expectation. I get away with, I play great, get paid off, miss a small thing. I don't get punished. I get into you have to like tell yourself, okay, this is definitely not your new standard. But I'm incredibly thankful when I'm in these situations because you can't take it for granted. You can go weeks and months without winning anything. So, and that's for me is way easier actually. Like not winning, but when you do win, the mind wants you to believe that you some kind of leveled up, or this is the new level of expectation you should have for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this all the time. But that's actually my biggest challenge at this stage, because sometimes I have some amazing weekends, and then the next 2 weekends I just get smoked. So my brain will tell me, oh, I was supposed to do better, but in reality maybe it evens out. And I just look now, the best thing for me is actually to just look at like the yearly, like how much did I win on the year, and usually I'm pretty happy about where I sit when it comes to that. So don't get too caught up in stretches, whether they're positive like or very negative. I also see people change, so they go to a tournament, they go, I don't know, how many rounds did you play this weekend in Ghent? How many rounds was it like in the main event?
I played 7.
You played 7. So okay, so let's just take your example. You have prepared a legacy deck for a 7-round tournament. You end up going 2-3 drop, and then you come home on Monday, and then you start playing a little bit on Tuesday, and you change decks. That to me is like not very. That's like a symptom of then it's the preparation that's wrong. If such a small batch can make you change your mind about
Yeah.
what's the best for you to play, then it's the preparation that's bad, because
Yeah,
the
that's
small
fair.
sample size is just not gonna move the needle in the grand scheme of things. So that's some of the things that I'm actually pretty good at. I keep playing a deck if I go 0-2, 1-3, 2-2, whatever. I keep playing a deck if I think it's the best thing to be doing. But when I'm winning a lot, that's where the challenge comes in, because then my brain is telling me I'm the champ of the world, right?
I
You're the
I
shit.
I really want to dig into this because I think there's a lot here. So
100%.
we're talking about like tournament prep, looking at things on different scales, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
And then kind of like good and bad reasons to shift what you're doing. So let's kind of like go in one by one. So like looking at things at different scales, right? Like, when you're talking about playing with purpose in general, is there a way to kind of like separate, oh, I'm doing this because I need to prep for the next event, versus I'm doing this because I think it's what's going to make me better in the long run? Or are those kind of like the same thing to you at this point?
So short term goals versus long term goals is basically how I um, understand this question.
Mhm.
And I think when you're in the moment, it's hard to say, oh, this is going to be not that good for me in the coming week, but a year from now, I'll look back and be happy that I did it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's tough, but you can, in the back mirror, you can see, oh, I'm happy I played all these different modern decks. For instance, last year or maybe 2 years ago, I hadn't played modern for a while. So what I did was I took the like top 15 decks. I played them all in one preliminary event on Magic Online, which is short term not very advisable when it comes to economy. But then 3 months from there, I was like, okay, I'm pretty well rounded in modern now. So it's basically just I was investing in the longer term, so to speak.
Mhm.
And I was happy afterwards. But while doing it, I really had to remind myself why I was doing this, right? Because it
Mhm.
wasn't really a good idea to play decks I didn't know how to play.
Yeah. So this kind of ties into like finding your fun is the term that I always used to use for it in chess. Like trying to justify the things that you find difficult by saying, well, I'm doing this for this thing that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
coming back to like the team league example, I would like sit there doing my opening prep, which is objectively miserable. Like I don't know anyone who truly enjoys doing opening prep. But I would sit there and I would go, yeah, but when this pays off in the team tournament with my friends,
Yeah.
we're all going to be sitting there happy afterwards, and this work is going to be worth it. So how do you have certain techniques or like ways of framing things that let you do that for the things that you don't enjoy as much in Magic? Would you play like a deck that you don't enjoy just because you think it'll improve you on some sort of fundamental? How do you kind of like approach that? How do you make sure you frame that correctly for yourself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so let's take an example. For instance, I've been lucky to qualify for a few Magic Online showcase challenges, and in those metagames, we have around 25 to 30 people, and the decks they qualified with are all public.
Yeah.
So I can have a favorite deck in whatever, Legacy, Pauper, Vintage, but if that lines up poorly against what I think will be the field, then sometimes you have to bite a bullet and play a deck where you don't enjoy it, but the the enjoyment of winning is more than that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That makes sense.
So you have to kind of measure it. Is my fun during these 6 hours worth more than my estimated chance of winning, which will go way up if I play, let's say, Delver, for example, which isn't my favorite deck, but I mean, I'll play it if I think it's the best thing to be doing. So you have to find out, is the fun worth more than the winning? What's worth more? So that will definitely get me through it. For instance, these days I wanna get to the top of the mountain, so I can definitely play some, let's say, boring decks. I can do that for the sake of an objective for sure. So it has to do with how important is the objective versus how big is the price I have to pay to get there.
Mhm.
I think
So it's just like a piece of math, I would say, a math problem, to be honest.
Yeah, the thing I always struggle with in that particular math problem is I feel like I play worse with decks I don't enjoy. I'm trying to like quantify that versus how strong I think the choice is.
Yeah, definitely. Personal like skills and lack thereof. Let's say you're an expert with Death Shadow, but you're not the best. What do I know? Ad nauseum Storm player in the world, but Storm is the best choice. Then, of course, playing the deck you're an expert in can kind of eclipse the power level of the other deck for sure. And that's also it's very subjective because you're not going to have any. So that's actually where it differs from a math problem, I guess, because you're not going to have an exact answer, but you really need to like know yourself, like know your shortcomings, know your strengths, in order to make that probability, which is basically like probability at the end of the day, right?
The way I've often done it is like if it's an online event where I can just like chill and have things to like really refocus me between rounds, I'm more willing to play the deck I don't enjoy. If it's a paper event where I'm like traveling and hanging out with friends, I more want to play the deck I'll enjoy because then I'm going to be in a better mood around my friends as well.
Yeah.
And there are some decks that I can play and have a great time while losing. And there are other decks where that's not the case.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I always tell people to play the formats where they even enjoy losing, and that's going to make it's Magic a lot more joyful in general.
Don't play the Magic. Play the Magic that brings you joy, folks. Play the Magic that brings you joy.
Yeah.
Unless you have to desperately do it. But I was going to say, because I know, Andreas, you've been like very big on Cube. Cube is like one of your favorite formats. I think in Cube, like you can sort of. I think this is with limited in the comparison constructed. You kind of have. I think like you kind of have to go outside of your comfort zone with like limited form, like Cube, especially where you're like, okay, well, I don't normally draft this kind of archetype, but it's very much open. So let's pick up these cards and like play this, even though this isn't my favorite kind of way to play. Like take Reanimator. Like some people love drafting Reanimator. Some people are like. Okay, here you go. Here's a Grizzlebrand. I'll tag you for 7. I know, it's a whole. I mean, I love it, but this is I'm a woman of taste. But I think that also helps, and I think the fact that something I've always admired with you is that you do play a variety of like formats and decks in like every both limited and constructed. So like I've like folks, if you look up ecobaronen on MTG Goldfish, you're never gonna know what they're gonna play because you're there going like, well, you went your top 16 with like say like Doomsday, but then you also played like Death Shadow, then you 5-0'd the league with something else, and you're like, I've got well, this could be this person could be playing anything. And so unlike some people who like their MODO name and that all they play is one deck, like we'll say Brian Cook as a good example of like he's playing Storm, and I think that's always fun. But with you, it's like it's going to be a thing. Although I will out Andreas a sec, folks. Look, if you see, I'm going to say this is kind of like a slight rib on you, Andreas. Folks, if you see an ecobaronen deck list for a big tournament, your showcases, your challenges, not prelims or 5-0s, just actual high-level tournaments, just look at his sideboard and then write in the comments what's very distinctive about an ecobaronen sideboard, because now I cannot unsee an ecobaronen sideboard. And I am very, very annoyed that I can never unsee it now. And I'm very, very sad. Sarah, you can also look at it. I think I told you, Sarah, what it is, right?
No, I actually have no idea what you're talking about. I'm going to look him up on
just look him up
Goldfish now.
and just see, just have a look.
Quick point about the that I like to play like different decks, different formats.
Yeah.
There is a journey to get to that point, right?
Because, of course.
Let's say 10 years ago, all I did, I started to play Modern, and I played Blue Scapeshift because my friend Thomas had played that deck, and it looked like a fun strategy, delay the game, then win the game in one swoop.
Yeah.
And then I kept playing that actually for a few years. I remember getting a message from This is going to be a good one, actually. I just remembered it. It's one of the best moments. I got a message from Andrea Mengucci on Magic Online, and he said, and back then Game of Thrones was like super big on HBO, and he was like, "I hear you're the king of the North when it comes to Scapeshift." And then he had like a few questions, which is something I'll never forget. Yeah, that was pretty awesome. So back then I was known for being a blue Scapeshift player.
That's what I knew about you. That's how I heard.
Mm-hmm. But then I kind of decided I wanted to be more ambidextrous. So I started playing aggressive decks, playing. I think I owned all modern decks like Affinity, Burn, Infect, stuff like that, and I kind of just played them by turn in the local events. And then I bought the decks on Magic Online and kind of did the same. So I wanted to be like a well-rounded player. I don't know why I had that vision that that's what I wanted to be. So it's a lot of years of dedicating myself to just, I don't know how to do this, but I'm sure I'll be great at it, and just go right in, right?
Yeah.
And then today, I think last weekend I played like Dredge and Vintage, Tabated, Burn and Pauper and Tabated. Like next weekend, you can see me playing like 2 blue decks. Like, I can play whatever.
Yeah.
And I like to play whatever. Also, just switching it up. But it comes with kind of hard work to get to a point where you can actually appreciate and execute different strategies.
Are there like core like fundamentals that you just see to like playing Magic, where like certain strategies lend themselves towards certain skill sets? And so if you thought you were worse at one thing, you'd be like, oh, I can play this format, this deck, that'll work exactly that. Is that something you would like give as advice to people? Because like in the chess analogy, again, I remember being told by one of my coaches at one point, just play this different opening for like 2 months because you need to work on this. This opening has a plan that leads to that, and you can get some experience. I feel like the equivalent in Magic could be like, oh, your combat math sucks. You need to play limited for 2 months. Is that something that you would like advise? Is that something you've done? How would you say, and what kind of fundamentals do you think are there that span across formats? Do certain formats flex different muscles, if that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure, all of that is thoughts you can be having, but at the end of the day, it has to do with what are you looking to achieve. Because a lot of players are happy to just be brainstorm players, or be doomsday experts, or be Blood Moon turn 1 casters. Like that's and that's all. And all of these are equally worth as much in my book. But if you actually care about expanding, then I can definitely see myself back in the day. I remember aggro decks. I felt like I didn't like the feeling of them running out of gas. I liked the feeling of stabilizing and winning with superior card quality. So I was a mid-range or control player. But once I started to play aggressive decks, I kind of understood the way, like the strengths they have, because I only saw the weaknesses. Yeah. I remember with Tron, it was the same. Oh, the deck always mulligans to Oblivion and stuff like that. But then when you play it and you see, oh, okay, so this can just overwhelm opponents and just put games away fast. Like that's so you can challenge yourself if you have the ambition to be more well-rounded. But it's a matter of resources, right? It's time. It's sometimes money if you have to buy cards. So it's you have to measure up your ambitions with your basically the tools you have in your toolbox and the time you have available. But I have definitely played aggro decks with the purpose of seeing the other side of the coin, which is how to close out games, how to put pressure on opponents, stuff like that for sure. I can recommend it if you have those goals. But there's nothing wrong with being like enjoying one archetype or whatever, like only being a Delver player and then messing around with different splashes. That's the same. Like, a win is a win in Magic. I hate the narrative that, I played against Burn, or I played against Tron, or I got Chaliced, or I got Trinisphered, or whatever. Like this, these statements are very loaded towards that. Not all decks are created equally, which I hate the thought of, basically.
Yeah, I kind of prefer the idea, and this is something I've been enjoying about Red Stompy in particular and Legacy currently, is that I'll look at a hand and I'll go, okay, this sequence is better against this one is better against this. I'm going to choose to lose to this one, and I play like the other line. Because then even if I lose, I feel like I had agency, right? I'm like, I made that decision to lose to that thing, and that is now a decision I can review and see if that was, percentage based, like the best choice. It feels a lot more, as opposed to me just going, oh, well, I got reanimated. Well, you had a line that could possibly have beat that. You chose not to. Reanimator is only this amount of the metagame, and what you did was better against everything else. You made the right choice. It didn't pay off. You signed up for that. You move on.
I had an example of that at the last event I played, where I was playing against Scam, and the first feeling is, well, my opponent on the play did the grief scam thing both in the games they were on the play, which is game 1 and game 3. And initially you're like, oh, why did they grief scam me? Like, it's the last round of the tournament. I just want to play Magic. And then I was like, well, that's kind of what their deck does. And like, I kept a hand of like, okay, well, if I don't get grief scammed, I can still play Magic, but I got grief scammed. So, okay, we move on with our life. Like, I had it against like a creative technique player where I basically made the decision of like, I think I have a turn to develop my mana so I can play my lock piece, or I just play my lock piece and then it was like, basically, do I play my lock piece and then have no mana, or do I develop my mana and then play a lock piece? And I chose to develop my mana for the thought I had a turn, and I didn't have a turn. And I made that decision, and I went through that decision tree, and I was like, okay, well, that's I played to the best of my ability, and I made those decisions, and I'm happy with them. And I think a lot of players sometimes can't see that, and this is where they get results orientated, and it gets really and then the rabbit hole kind of goes down, basically.
There's a term in fighting games that's a knowledge check of like a certain form of offense or a certain mechanic that requires you to like know about it and be able to beat it. And I've always felt like creative technique is a knowledge check in Legacy. Like the last time I played against creative technique, before the most recent one, they weren't on the Tybalt's Trickery plan, so I didn't factor in the Tybalt's Trickery plan when I played against them next, and I got murdered because I thought I had an extra turn when I didn't. But now I know that's a thing, and I'm going to play my damn Trinisphere on turn 1.
I'm going to play my Trinisphere on turn 1, and I'm going to like it.
But Sahara, can I just chime in on that example you just gave?
Yeah, of course you can.
It's very typical that in these cases where, let's say, you develop the mana or threat or whatever first, and then the lock piece, because you want to like cut off turns from the opponent in the other end of the game, basically. So that's it. So when that works out, a lot of people will tell themselves that they're geniuses. But when it doesn't work out, they'll tell themselves they made a mistake. And neither of those are necessarily true. And I think that's the nuance that I'm very interested in, basically. When I play, did I win because I did this, or did I win despite me doing this? Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So that's one of my favorite things, is evaluating why I won a game. Why did I win this game? And when I review this, I surprisingly often find times where I was kind of playing with fire, but I got away with it unknowingly. It's only because I review the game with a fresh mind that I know, I took this risk in this spot. Whoa, it was so lucky my opponent didn't have the Bowmaster or whatever it could be. But being aware that this could happen, and then you still feel like it's the right move to do, that's the win in my book. And then I don't care about if they actually had it or not, or you died to creative technique, or they played a tap land that said pass. That's not what's interesting to me is the info you had at the time. So that's the win. So for me, if you're trying to learn, in the learning curve, that's the win. I don't care about the actual win or loss, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was an article about this way back in the day. I can't remember who wrote it. If anyone remembers, please get in the comments. And I remember it was talking about like lessons learned from joining a protesting team for like the first time. And they got to like a position in a game, and the opponent top decked and the game swung, right? And what happened was, instead of playing that out, they just showed the top deck and went, cool, that was like a 20% chance to happen. You're at 0.8, I'm at 0.2. Let's shuffle up and go again. kind of thing. It was like separating results into like the EV. And this is where EV is actually very, very helpful. Because if you take an 80% to win line, but that time you lost, it's still a win. You increased your EV. You do that play over an infinite amount of time, you're going to win 80% of the time. You're going to lose 20% of the time. It's that kind of review to separate the results, which is probabilistic, versus the actual value, right?
Yeah.
It's like two different things.
I like that a lot. But a lot of people are struggling with, so if you're trying to phrase this, let's say I made this 80% play and it didn't work out. And then, just for the sake of argument, let's say I'm recording for content. Then I kind of have to say that without sounding like...
you're salting.
Yeah, exactly. And which is actually challenging, because in the short term, it's sad it didn't work out. But it's a good pat on your own back to say, yeah, I think if I keep doing this, I'll come out ahead in the long term, and that's like an important aspect. But it's especially in this day and age with social media and stuff, it's pretty tough to read a sentence like that and go like, oh, okay, that guy has it figured out. That's a good mindset. Yeah. A lot of people will just read, oh yeah, sure, buddy. You lost, but you're trying to gain something. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's
it's super tough to actually have that. I talk from experience. Like people think I'm trying to save face, if that translates to English.
Yeah, that's
which is sad, because then I kind of miss my platform to inspire, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the difficulty of like probabilistic, imperfect information games versus something like chess, where there's perfect information and it's very kind of clear, right? Like, we don't deal with probabilities as much in chess.
Right.
So I think it's, Sarah, on that point though, but I just think with Magic and as you were saying, Andreas, the age of like social media, I think just a lot of players, it's especially on Twitter, we'll take Twitter as the prime hotbed. Magic Twitter.
Yep.
It's a whole thing. And I think a lot of players, when they're trying to put their name out there, they're like, oh, I like it's the quintessential I 5-0, I trophy the league with X. And I'm like, yeah, and like, unless it's hilarious, like punishing waterfalls 5-0ing with like living end in legacy, like that's cool. But like, if you're just 5-0ing, like, if you're 5-0ing and it's not you're 5-0ing a league and you're demonstrating it as like, this is like a log for myself. Like I've done that sometimes, where I'm like, I'll post my successes and my failures if I'm working on something. But some people go, oh, like I 5-0'd the league, and like, here's my Patreon, and here, like, I'm doing all this, and I'm like, but who are you? And like, I remember there was a couple of players last year who were picking up initiative, and me diligently working away in the background, getting my 3-2s and my 2-3s, and like just learning the deck and all this kind of stuff. And people were like, I am 30-0 in leagues, and I am like, sure, mate.
Just ignoring all the leagues where you weren't going.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just ignore all the times that you might be like 30-10, like, or you're, and I think when you said, I think you said earlier, Andreas, about seeing it in the sort of long term, like the, over the course of a year, like I know, like I know with, in Vintage, for example, shout out Justin Janari for tracking all the data. Like, I know they have their leaderboard. They do. I think it's over 2 years. I think it's like since like 21 to like present day. I think he's been doing it for like that period, and they track everything. And I think after the Vintage bot, it's then you, because Discoveren is a bot. I do not care. I don't care what anyone says. Discoveren is the Vintage bot. It was made by Magic Online to play Vintage.
I've actually heard rumors that he top 16 the Japanese Eternal Weekend.
Yeah. It's he's a bot though. He's a bot. He's not real. Why would anyone with that record be real? He's just a bot. Until I see him in the flesh, he's not real. It's like I never play around. It's like I don't like Mind Break Trap in my eyes is not a real card when I play vintage. I'm like, this card doesn't exist. It's the same with Discovering. If I play against Discovering, I'm playing against the vintage bot, and he's gonna have the best chance of playing on the best level because he's got probabilistic like chances of crushing you with Doomsday, and then we move on with our lives. But yeah, I think that's it. But I joke about that, but I think he is also an incredible Magic player. But I think one thing I've always been admired about you, Andreas, especially on Twitter, is you're very much someone who is like, here is my learning. Here is what I have seen. You're very open about like I've enjoyed your pack one pick ones for Cube of like, this is what I'm thinking. And then when people talk to you about it, you like have conversations with them. Like for you, did the learning, like regardless of results, like is it now just second nature to you now? Like, is it something that you're just, I mean, from sounds of it, it is, but is there times where you're just like, I wish I wasn't always kind of doing it for learning. And you're just like, oh, just. And then, do you get frustrated like the rest of us? Basically, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't. So funnily enough, I don't get frustrated about any thing that happens in game, but yeah. I can doubt myself when I see everybody else being more passionate about the game in another way than I'm passionate about the game. Because winning a tournament, let's say I win a tournament the coming weekend, I'm not even going to crack a smile.
Yeah.
Because it's all like a process for me. Yeah, so I'm sometimes envious of the passion that a lot of players show, yourself included. Like, I don't have a percentage of that passion for the game. At least it comes in a different form, the kind of passion I have. So yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
No, you go ahead. Finish your thought.
It's just that's the only thing. I don't get affected by results these days. But that's also a flip side because I don't get happy about doing well either. So it's not like a dance on roses. It's just I think if you're gonna handle every bad situation as a learning experience, you also are doing that with good experience to some extent. So sometimes I'm practicing, especially when I'm like hanging out with friends on Discord or whatever. I try and kind of animate myself and like practice the fun times, so to speak.
Yeah. I think there's something to said about that level of kind of like emotional detachment that can be like both a blessing and a curse and different kind of things. I'm gonna because I feel like we should talk about like reviewing games in general. We're just gonna like start from like my perspective. And then actually I've been watching a lot of Justin recently, Justin Gennari. And I think he's very good at doing this in-game in a way that I'm very bad at. So for me, like, I have playing time and I have reviewing time, right? And when I'm playing, it can be difficult for me to fully do that kind of like calculation of, oh, this was this EV at the time. And I can let my emotions get in there, but I tend to have strategies to control that. Like I have things like breathing exercises, things that I've used in chess fundamentally. Because chess is a game where you blunder and now you have to sit there for 2 hours dealing with the consequences of it.
Right.
And you need to be able to scramble in the best way you can.
Yep.
And I've blundered horribly and then held my opponent to a draw because I've been able to recover that mentally.
Yep, makes sense.
But I find it very difficult to look at the game objectively outside of that. I have a very like narrative-based thinking style.
Are you talking about in the moment or when you review it, let's say a few days later?
In the moment. So when I review it, then I'm detached.
Yeah.
My process for chess was always like, you play a game, I make like 1 or 2 notes on my score sheets, and then I don't look at it till 2 days later. And then I review the game objectively, best I can, and then I run it through the computer, who is the ultimate like objective truth measure.
Right.
Computers are way stronger than humans are at chess at this point. It's very much like taking it to a coach or whatever. In Magic, I have a similar process. So I'll play a game, something will happen, I'll feel some sort of way about it. I'll make notes after the game that I think this is a game I need to review, and then I'll review it like 2 days later. And I find that sometimes there's like a disconnect between those two me's, if that makes sense, and that
Yeah.
usually indicates something that I need to work on. Whereas I think Justin, I've seen him playing, and he'll like make a play, it doesn't work out. He expresses frustration because that's a natural thing to have. But
Damn,
then,
Urza Saga.
yeah, but then 2 minutes later, he's going, okay, but what were the actual chances of that? And he's
Yeah.
able to do that while still in the game, which is something I am not able to do.
Yeah.
I think that's also him as a content creator. Like, he's just, especially with Vintage, because it is so convoluted and there's so many things happening. Or you just play as a saga and win the game. I think he's quite good at doing that. I think that's something that is his strength, and I think even for us, let's say of Legacy, I think we've also been like, oh, well, how could have we, when we're trying to talk to people, and I think, Andreas, you're also doing content now. I think it's something that comes with practice of like both good and bad. What could you have done differently? But it's harder to do it for content and entertainment than when you do it for yourself, because then it's like there's a stronger mirror, for want of a better phrase, when you kind of detach yourself, because it's like, oh, this is my play. I'm not doing it for the sake of content, or I'm not doing it for X reason. This is my own improvement, and that's, I think, a slightly bitter swallow, perhaps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's something that I admire about Justin in particular, that he can do that. But I understand that my process isn't that, and it can't be that. That's not like how I get the most out of it. I could try and make myself do that, but I think I would get worse results. And so I kind of wanted to like talk about personal review processes, what works for each of us. Do you like taking notes at the time, or do you just disregard that and come back objectively? How do you take what you think you've learned from review and then apply that in game? It's also very difficult. Like, you can realize something's objectively better in the abstract, but are you actually going to recall that and do it when that situation comes up again? How do you apply?
It's very complex, because Magic is a game where a lot of these situations that I go back and review are most likely going to be very close to unique, but we can take a little bit of experience with us in our backpack, and that will like color our view on new situations, right? So I'm never gonna go like one for one on these, but it will be part of my way to see the next tough scenario. Definitely, there's just so much nuance in Magic, but I agree. It's exciting to talk about with the different mindsets. You encounter something uh, unfortunate or whatever. You rationalize, oh, okay, I did a good move, let's play on, or I made a terrible move, let's try and make the most of it, like what you're talking about in chess. And then I think I remember I saw a top 8 match at some point where a pro player miscounted like his amount of mana. He played a Rite of Flame, then realized, oh, I don't have enough mana for this Dragon Storm. And then they kind of collected their thoughts and then just played a Ponder and moved on. Like, they just threw away a Rite of Flame for no reason, but they kind of pulled themselves back in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And did a good job to finish the game. So that's basically what I'm trying to do in the grander scheme of things. It's, we can't always make the right play, and it doesn't help us to like hit ourselves in the head with a big sledgehammer, right? So we need to. I mean, Magic is an emotional game unless you really work on it not being an emotional game. I've oftentimes heard, "Oh, I lost this match. I made this oversight. Then I kind of lost steam. I was discouraged in the next match. I should have dropped from the tournament." Stuff like that is very similar. Oh no, not like very very normal to hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think working on your what's that called? Like your how
mental game psychology.
Yeah, like how not agile, but a word similar to that. Like working on your mental game in that capacity will help you a lot, because you're going to make mistakes. You can maybe make mistakes at the highest stage with a lot on the line. You can make a mistake round one and rob yourself of the chance to ever get to like the fun rounds of a tournament. So
Yeah.
just be ready for that. It's going to happen inevitably for everyone. But yeah, the emotional part is why I review the games when I'm 100% away from my emotions, and then
Yeah.
hopefully I can learn more than, let's say I just made a 95% play that's going to work out. I got quote unquote unlucky in the spot and I lost thousands of dollars, like just for the sake of argument. It doesn't necessarily help me if I'm going to review that game straight after.
Yeah. There's a tinge to it. You're like,
yeah, for someone that's going to be 5 minutes. For someone that's going to be 5 days or 5 months, like I have friends who still have like bad feelings when they think about something that happened years ago at a tournament.
Yeah.
Like it's.
There's a pro I know who, they were in the tournament. They felt that they had been like, that their opponent had like their one out and they drew it and it knocked them out with intention for top eight, and they still talk about it to this day. And you're like, okay, like this was also like 7, 8, like 5 to 10 years ago. Like we've moved on. Like I'm like, there's sometimes where you tell stories where you're like, where you're telling stories about games you played where you're like, oh, I did this and I did this, or I like, oh, this happened to me and I've learned from it. Like I've been quite vocal about my GP Bologna journey and my round 10 against Tristan Potzel and getting absolutely eviscerated. But I've also said that that's probably one of the best matches I ever was involved in, because it leveled me up at a level that
and that's awesome. Like
you allowed need those matches in your arsenal.
You allowed yourself to learn from an experience that some people would look back and be like, oh, I can't think about those times or whatever.
I can't think about how I got absolutely eviscerated by what became Bug Snowco, by a player who was much better than I was. And I think there's an element of humility. I think and I don't know this, and I don't want to throw like gender into it or anything like that, but I do think there are some players who don't necessarily have humility. And I think it is a bit of the Levine Trench thing of like, I think when you start and when you're like, at the other side, I think you have that. But then the players in the middle, they're like, I have to be the best and I have to play the best. And my opinion is correct and no other way is correct. And I'm like, if you just came off your high horse for half a second, you'd realize that this is a team like approach. Like, just because your view is like X doesn't necessarily mean you're the only voice in the room.
No matter what level you're at, you should stay curious for sure. And by having a closed mindset like that, you're just limiting your own growth as well, which is the opposite of what you want to do. Because for those players, I imagine their biggest wish is to keep climbing up the ladder and becoming better at their hobby, or maybe even more than hobby. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Maybe it's part of what defines them as humans. So that's like one of the most important things. But you're kind of limiting your own growth if you're thinking like that.
For sure.
Magic has too much nuance.
There's so much nuance.
The kind of next question, I still want to dig into this review process, because I think it's one of the least talked about things in Magic, while still being one of the most important things to discuss. So the big question for me in general is, do you review everything, or do you have a good way of working out which matches actually matter? Like, which spots matter? And kind of how do you decide that? Do you review everything when it's a new deck for you? Is it kind of like an experience with the archetype or with the matchup kind of thing? Or is it you just have built up this kind of criteria for yourself?
Yeah. So I review two different categories. One is where I'm proud of how I played and I want to show it to my friend, which is something that can build confidence. Like, look what I built. And then he would usually go, oh, what did you think about this? And we'll always find something. So even though my approach is, oh, look, I played perfect Magic. I won. I'm a genius. Then there's always new. Yeah.
I know I found that funny, but I just find it's like, oh, look at this cool MacGuffin I made.
Always something that we can do better. Like I often use the term slamming the door. So sometimes you're winning a game with 99% certainty. I want to get that to 100. Then that'll be my goal.
Yeah.
So we usually find spots like that. But also there's, let's say I lose like a quarterfinal or win an in match or whatever, and I sit with the feeling, I'm pretty sure if this was like in the beginning of the day, or I didn't get up at 6 a.m. or whatever, I could probably have done better. So let's review this game. Then I'll say, okay, round 6, game 3. I'll just make that note. So it's basically if I'm confident that I played well and got to reap the reward, or that I didn't give myself the best chance to win. Those are the kind of two categories that I like to look at. So one is building confidence while also always discovering some new small stuff it has showed, and the other one is like, let's really dig into this and see if I did a good job, so I can kind of leave it to let it to rest, or however you want to say.
Yeah, that's fine.
And so, okay, so that's your personal perspective. You do help people with their magic. You've helped Sahar previously. Do you take different approaches depending on who they are? Would you like advise a newer player just to get their reps in, or would you advise more review? I'm kind of coming into this from like a different perspective, because chess, there's like a culture in chess when you're at a tournament where you play your round, you go into another room with all your friends once you finish your round, and people will just sit there like going through the game and getting their friends' opinions on like specific moves. That's like really, really common. Whereas I come to Magic and I feel like that's less common. And then in esports, for instance, there's a very fun content creator for Valorant who does coaching content called Wahujin, or the Banana. And Wahujin is very much like, you should record all your games and you should review all your games. You should play 1 or 2 games a day maximum, and you should review the footage and just focus on a couple points, nothing else. It doesn't matter if you're doing these other things wrong, focus on these fundamentals, review, and then later you can review those more in-depth things. Do you think these are just different approaches for different people, or is there like a better way for specifically Magic?
Yeah, great question about the coaching. So for me, it's pretty simple. So every person is different. So that means every relation is different. So I would sell myself and my whoever player I'm working with very short if I would just apply like a manual and go from A to Z and work like that. So what I've also done in my day job for 15 years, it's trying to realize the person in front of me's potential, not following any manual. So that's what I bring into Magic. So I need to learn what gets you up in the morning, what's your situation, how much time do you have on hand, what goals do you have? And that's always going to be different. The mix is always going to be different. Also, how people learn. Do you learn by getting a large stack of homework? Do you learn by feeling like you've been seen, heard, cared about, or whatever? It's going to be so different from person to person. So when I coach, I do my absolute best to find out which buttons to push to realize the most potential. Sometimes I'm gonna hit a home run. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated because, getting to know people, you kind of have to let your guard down. You need to allow like you being fragile in front of sometimes a stranger, stuff like that. So it's a lot about building trust and the individuality of who am I sitting in front of. So that's going to be my approach. I would never make a YouTube video and go like, yeah, just follow this from A to Z and you'll realize whatever goal you have in 2 years.
Ecobaronen's top 5 guide for reviewing gameplay. Let's go.
Maybe you can do it for gameplay review in particular, but once you start having the actual person on the other side of the screen involved, it's just so unique, individual, subjective, and I tell myself I do a decent job at it, but who knows?
I think there's some... sorry, Sarah. Sorry, you go first. Apologies.
I was just going to say, I don't want to sell Wahujin short because I feel like I did. The way he says it is this is like a general framework to get people started.
Yeah.
He found that people just getting started reviewing, that's a big hurdle. So he finds that giving them like a starting framework is helpful. And it's just like any review is better than no review.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then once you're doing that, the way he works is he runs a raffle for all of the people in his Discord, and he will just go, okay, send me a replay of yours. He'll fully review it and then individually give you things that you need to do for the next review by the time you submit your next review to him.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you win gift cards. That's like the entire premise of his channel. But there is like a framework that then people fit into. Do you think that works for Magic, or is that not?
I think it has to do with. So usually when I get messaged by, oh, I want to look into coaching, I have a few questions or whatever, I'll also have questions for them to get to know them. So I will have some kind of starting point, but very quickly it's going to be so individualized. But I'm going to have some kind of starting point depending on, for instance, I've had people message me and be like, I want to win prizes at my F&M, or I'm tired of losing to my wife at the kitchen table. Like, I'm not kidding here. Or I want to qualify for my first PT. I have it's a big span, and of course I have some different tools for like where you are on your Magic journey / timeline, but it's just going to be individual so quickly, in my opinion. Just the fact that we get on a call and we get to know each other, we share some laughs, we share some good stories, we get to know each other like family life wise, even like sometimes it gets personal. It's like going to some kind of therapist in some way, I can imagine. So it's just so individualized.
I think there's some coaches who do that though. There is like, I definitely have had, when I've had Magic coaching, like I'd be very upfront. I've worked with Andreas for many, many years throughout my Magic journey. And I remember when I was looking for a coach and I basically was like, hey, I'm looking at XYZ. And I had coaches DM me and they're like, oh, I have this guy to basically make you a Magic player. I'm like, you haven't asked me what my goals are. You've just been like, here's the manual to get better. And I'm like, you don't know where I'm going with it. Like, why are you asking me? And all the coaches I've ever worked with have kind of asked, where is your goals? And I think that's super duper important.
It comes down to, why do we play Magic? And there can be different reasons for that. Do you play Magic to go to Italy to order a bowl of spaghetti and have fun with your friends? Do you play Magic to lift some kind of trophy and send a picture to your grandma? Why do you play Magic? Right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be different. What gets us up in the morning? What keeps us going? What keeps us motivated? What's the journey about? What's the... Yeah. So
100%.
Magic has so much nuance to it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think it's challenging when... This is something that when me and Sarah started the channel, we found frustrating, is that Sarah coming from all these backgrounds in other games, and then we looked at Magic and we're like, why does Magic have this? And then we're like, because it's nuanced, it's complicated, it's messy, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of players who are trying to make it simpler and quantify it and trying to make it sort of this sort of finite thing. And I think some people kind of just need to remember that, enjoy the mess. So please and thank you.
That's a good point, actually, that I thought about before getting on this call, that Magic is on the surface like a zero-sum game. There's going to be 50% of losers in every round of a Magic tournament.
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to you to change that narrative to, this is round 7. This is my 7th opportunity to learn today. This is my 7th opportunity to meet a cool Magic player today. This is my 7th opportunity to get better, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to you to set those standards, because the ones directly from the factory are 50% of us are going to lose.
Yeah.
One of us is a loser in 30 minutes.
Yeah. You're going to win. You're going to lose more times than you win. One thing actually on that point of like, I kind of want to bring this back to like motivation. And it's something that I think that I've spoken about with Sarah before, of like, when you're preparing for a tournament, you have a goal. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. You're working towards X goal. But I think, Sarah, did you call it infinite length?
Yeah, like an infinite length game. And this is kind of coming from poker primarily, where if you're a cash player in poker, you tend to approach things very differently to tournament players in poker. Because cash, the game never ends, right? You're playing an infinite number of hands.
Sit down when you want, leave when you want.
Exactly. You sit down, you play hands, and they just keep stacking on top of each other. Whereas tournaments, it's very much like, okay, did you do well in this discrete package. It's like continuous versus discrete, basically. And I feel like Magic is very discrete and like tournament to tournament, but you can also look at it in that kind of continuous time frame thing, right? Like you can either be prepping for something specific, like a PT, where you're going to be approaching things very differently or motivated very differently, versus, oh, I just want to put up consistent progress on Magic Online, for instance. And you're a player who's kind of done both at different points in your life.
Yeah.
How different is that in terms of motivating yourself or the approaches you take in order to, keep yourself going on these kind of things?
Yeah, so when you're preparing for a certain tournament, the motivation is high, but it's also a big balloon that can fall flat. And the nature of Magic is that some games of Magic are just only in the cards, and some percentage of Magic you can impact the outcome.
Yeah.
So on any given Sunday, you go to a tournament, depending on how big it is, but chances are you're not going to do well. That's just the reality of the situation. But if your mindset is, oh, I sacrificed this, I sacrificed my sleep, I didn't see my friends, I didn't go to my son's sports game or whatever it is, then all of a sudden the stakes are very, very high. So you need a good balance between being motivated and not putting up some stakes where you can't really handle the bad outcome, so to speak. So that's definitely something that I'm not going to say I struggled with it, but I've been in contact with that like earlier on, where it's like, oh, there's this big whatever tournament on the weekend I'm qualified for. I've been playing this deck all week. I really have it nailed down, I think, and then the result isn't as I wanted. And can I handle that, basically? The last experience of that I have was going to Eternal Weekend Prague and Eternal Weekend US. And one of the biggest questions for me was, can I handle going there, losing to, on paper, lesser players, and just still having a good time? And if the answer to that question was no, I shouldn't book the tickets. If the answer to that question is yes, I can go ahead and book the tickets, right? So that's the latest time I've been in contact with that, where it's a question you need to ask yourself. If you can't handle getting 0-3 or whatever, you shouldn't get up and play the early morning vintage challenge on Sunday, for instance. That's a good example. Like sometimes I don't get enough sleep, but I love playing vintage. And if I'm sitting there losing and I don't feel like it's worth it, then I shouldn't have gone up, right? Then I shouldn't have gotten up that morning. So
go back to bed.
So the decision has to be made before I'm in the middle of it, if that makes sense. So that requires a bit of a way to an ability to reflect. But the other one, where Magic is just, quote unquote, just a long timeline, and every match, every tournament is just an opportunity to get better, to evolve your game, to have more cool learnings and findings. I think that's the ideal way to be, for me at least. I don't ever invest emotionally a lot in these tournaments, or I always invest the same amount, I guess. But no matter if I lose or win, I'm looking forward to the next. I'm kind of in a good rhythm right now, where Magic's a long timeline. I don't plan on quitting tomorrow or next week, so I really have the long lights on, so to speak.
Yeah, you're here for the long haul, basically, which I think is healthy. I think if you're just, I just think some people get so wrapped, and I think the grind definitely does that to people. They're so zoomed in on, like, I have to qualify for the next RC, or I have to qualify for the PT, and you're like, just have some.
But how many players qualify these days? Let's say the tournament that was in Belgium this weekend.
Yeah.
How many was it? Like, is it 6,
24?
top 24 out of how many?
950.
No, that's okay. That's crazy. If those numbers are true, that's crazy. But let's play around with those numbers.
Yeah.
So that means that 25 out of 1,000. I'm bad at math. How much is that percentage wise? That's 2.5.
Yeah.
It's 0.25. It's even lower.
Yeah, it's less than 1%.
Are you sure?
Yeah, 0.25. Yeah. 25 out of 1,000.
I think it's 2.5, but whatever.
Is it 2.5? Probably.
Okay.
It is 2.5. Right. Yeah, Sarah, it's 2.5.
Yeah, sorry,
no worries. So that means you're basically expecting to come out as the top 2.5% of a field, that's just not very intelligent either. But it's just you're setting yourself up. You're setting yourself up for failure, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So the more you do that, the more magic becomes like a demon instead of an angel, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I see it with the grind, and I think that's why some people I've spoken to recently who are like, "Why am I doing this?" And like they just kind of get sucked in. And I think it's on MODO as well. MODO's not like, MODO grind also has the same thing of people just having to like constantly push and push and push and
Yeah.
demonstrate this, and you're like, you know what? It's fine. Just play the magic you enjoy.
It's demonstrate is actually it's a good word because it's all in the context of, let's say we were all just playing for our own sake.
Yeah.
There isn't anything about you being perceived as a god of the game or awesome deck builder or whatever narrative. We take that out of it, then it will be a much simpler. I think a lot of it's just
imagine if magic was simple.
Yeah, it's super tough with the social media thing because you start comparing yourself to others instead of just trying to improve yourself. I want to be the best Andreas I can be. I can never be the best Juju Bean. Like I can get inspired by his story, but a lot of people will use it as like negative. Why can't I be like this guy? Or why can't I achieve the same things as? And that's the danger of it. Like you need to figure out what's my journey here.
Yeah, I think Mason Clark said it in an episode.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. That bit, I saw that as well. That was awesome.
Yeah, he says like I compare myself to myself. It's like, am I the best? Am I? And I think like so many players just don't, and it's so tough to kind of just not compare.
He nailed it. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we will link that in the description because that episode genuinely like leveled me up as a Magic player.
I want to get into that a little bit as well because I find that comparison is the theft of joy is like an old idiom that I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
but I think there's also like places where people can fall down in self-comparison if they're not approaching it correctly, if it makes sense. I'm going to use myself here because I've had some recent tournaments that have not gone particularly well, and I'm kind of slowly trying to like deal with and analyze that to like move forward. And some of like the difficult things I've been dealing with is like sitting here like looking at a game and being like, I know I can play better than this. Like I know that if I just taken like that little bit of extra time, I would have come up with a better line. I would have done this better. And I'm trying to like move past being down on myself about it to what can I actually do about that though. And I find that's actually very difficult. I find that a lot of people are very good at identifying problems, but not very good at working out solutions. Myself included. The most recent tournament, I'd prepped Red Stompy, which is a deck I hadn't really played much before, because I thought it would be a good metagame call. And I think it was, even looking at like my matchups. My matchup spread was weird, but I feel like that deck is very good at punishing weird, so that's not a problem. But I found myself like rushing plays for no reason. And I'm still trying to like work out how I deal with that. How do I deal with the fact that if this was a league game, I would have been fine, but because it was a showcase, it wasn't, right? And I actually don't have the answer to this. But
can you explain why you treated it differently?
That's the thing. I'm not sure, and that's what I'm kind of trying to like internally interrogate.
Yeah.
Because I would have lines where. And these are like complex board states, like Stompy versus Initiative, there's Fable of the Mirror Breakers, there's Seasoned Dungeoneers, we're both on low life totals.
I can see this board state in my head.
Yeah, I have a Broadside Bombardiers, I can be copying Broadside Bombardiers to get multiple flings. And I came up with this really tricky line that basically would kill a bunch of stuff on their board. But I got a rules interaction wrong. And also, if I had just focused on it a bit longer, I could have just swung and flung my two Fables at their face and they would have died instead. And it's kind of trying to review things and be like, okay, I objectively know I made the incorrect play, but trying to figure out why is kind of where I'm starting to get stuck, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. How would you kind of try and guide someone through that, or would you just need way more data points before you could start?
I mean, with the information I have already, it's definitely a situation that you most likely never encountered before, and that's like on the top end of complicated scenarios you will face with playing mono red. And the thing about that is, if you can play like 50 games, and then all of those games were either you trouncing the opponent or you like mulliganing to 5 and getting dazed and wastelanded, like that is possible. You need a lot of games under your belt to get into the complicated situations on average, right?
Yeah,
So if you
100%.
see that situation for the first time in the most important match you've played, I mean, ever, let's just say that for the sake of argument, then it's going to be tougher for you to solve it real time. So it's like maybe you can set up like some kind of artificial game states, or have like partner, could be Sahar, like, okay, let's try and make a complicated initiative versus mono red board state, like construct our own what's the play or whatever, something along those lines. And then it's like you practice something that you might never need in a real match. So it's too much to ask that you had done that beforehand. I'm just trying to explain why it was difficult in the situation. But that could be something, if you find that fun to do, especially if you have a friend who's competent with another deck. That's like a method to do it. So, but in general, yeah, playing with new cards. I mean, that Bombardier card. Like I can tell you, even professional players on the Vintage Cube draft server, they have made very bad choices with that, and against that card, where it's like, oh, I'm just flushing my whole team's lunch money down the drain here because I don't know this card. It's complicated, right? I've seen that.
Weirdly, from just talking it through and actually saying it out loud, I feel like I've got an idea of what I could have done, and it isn't even a gameplay or a technical play thing.
Right.
There's this concept in chess of what's called a critical position. Because in chess, the kind of general advice we give is you should use all of your time on your clock over everything.
Yeah.
So it's going to be like, you've got 90 minutes to make 30 moves. You should average 3 minutes per move, right? But what good players do is on simple, intuitive moves, like your opening prep, we play them instantly.
Yeah.
So then we get this gut feeling of what's called a critical position.
Yeah.
Where it's a position where I go, oh, this is complicated. I'm going to take 10 minutes on this.
Yeah.
And I think what I need to learn to do, especially on MODO where slow play isn't an issue, is if I feel overwhelmed, just go, I've got the clock and I can take, like, I think I need to just work on stopping myself more and just not taking action.
Yeah, that's actually a good one. I have a few experience with that. So first of all, I don't know if you guys know the player called Gul Dukat, like Peter Gershel.
Daniel Goodshall.
Okay, perfect. So that player is like, he does exactly that, plays extremely fast, and then just tanks for 10 minutes when it's crunch time, or what did you call it, critical play?
Critical position.
Critical position. And that's just like, okay, so he's in the tank. He knows this is what the game boils down to.
Yeah.
He'll take his time. So I've actually been a bit inspired by that. One of Justin Gennar's recent videos, I play against him in a vintage challenge, and which is pretty sad because he's doing content and I'm sitting there for 10 minutes thinking about my doomsday pile. And the chat goes, oh, you might win on time. And then he's like, no, we're not going to win on time. This is like him cooking up his absolute best play to either win or lose the game, right? So the chess clock on Magic Online is huge. So another thing about the narrative is sometimes you'll get like, can you please play faster? Am I playing against a small child who doesn't know how to press buttons? Like, you'll hear all sorts of like noise in the chat basically. But in reality, the reality of the situation is you have 25 minutes and you decide what to do with that. You can cook your dinner while the other guy is sitting there fuming. That is totally legal play. Or you can think about your lines and I think it's already a great suggestion, just making a good habit of thinking a bit longer about what to do, basically, because you don't get extra points for doing your things fast. Like
Yeah.
there isn't any gain to doing things fast unless you're trying to save time for, the actual tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but that comes with practice. If you know
it's
the bread and butter plays in and out, you can speed up. But if the
Yeah.
deck
Yeah.
is new to you in general, then
It takes time.
you need to find a balance. But you don't get extra points for finishing with 15 minutes on the clock. That's
yeah,
just
it's something I talked about in the Doomsday video that we put up recently as well. As something like I genuinely really, really struggle with. And I think part of it is like I find in paper having a judge come over to my table to ask me to play more quickly really kind of like shakes me out of my thought
yep,
patterns.
yep.
And so I think I've kind of like maladapted to
Hmm.
playing too quickly now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um,
But Magic Online is not Magic the Gathering. It's a video
yeah,
game that is something like Magic.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's
I
Agreed.
like
think
my
as
take on
well.
it. But
Yeah,
if you
it is.
mirror Magic, your real life play, and Magic Online play, you can get into situations like that. I used to tell my friend, like when we play online, and I'm like, "Whew, I need to learn to play faster because otherwise I'm going to get in trouble at Eternal Weekend." Like when I took the 10 minutes on a Doomsday play, that's just not allowed, right?
You cannot take 10 minutes on a Doomsday Pile in paper tournament. You will get slow played. You will get a slow play warning, and you should know your piles.
But
Um,
but also taking it slowly means you can think deeper ahead of time. So if you do that on MODO, when it comes to paper, you front loaded a bunch of the deep thinking, right? So then
yeah.
you can execute more quickly. Because instead of taking 5 minutes online, you took 10 minutes, really got a confident answer, and now you can like generalize that thought process again over time if you get enough reps.
I, f-
Um,
I
yeah.
think as well, Sarah, like this is the different. I mean, again, this isn't necessarily about us, it's more about our guests, but like the difference between you and me in terms of like you have thought like 12 things and you're like, I've got all these things, and then you're like, I need to get execute it and it is, whereas I am like, mate, I've done this like multiple times, and I've like vibes checked it, and then when people go, oh Sahar, why are you taking so long? I'm like, cause Habibi, I actually have never got to this position. Shut up. I need to think. And I've definitely had it. I had it on Sunday where I was playing against a 12 post, and we got into a really grindy board state, and I shouted, I exclaimed very loudly, fuck, this is hard, while I'm trying to process what is happening.
Yeah.
Because you're in the middle of like, okay, I've got to think of this. And I think some people are better at that than others. And I think that's where paper play is useful. I think online that you have there's benefit, there's pros and cons of both in terms of trying to get better. But I also, one thing from the Doomsday video we kind of learned from Doishi is just you can't play around everything. So just take the decision you've made. It's with God now, and we move on with our lives.
Yeah. That's the
So
that's the difficult thing about Doomsday is once you've okay, I can play around X and Y, but can I
yeah,
also play around Z? You
yeah,
kind of have to turn that stone. That's how I'd approach the deck anyway.
yeah,
Because you can also just go in like semi blindfolded and hope for the best. But I also okay, I can play around that as well. But it's just so many combinations of stuff you can play around. But yeah, it has to do with you need to make like an educated choice in the end. What am
yeah,
I going to lose to today? Another one of my favorite expressions when you're
yeah,
like
yeah.
building a sideboard, making a play, choosing a deck, whatever. What do I want to lose to today? That's like something that'll guide you in the right direction a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Doomsday is that for sure. Then you have to accept sometimes you lose to I don't know what it is in Legacy. I'm not really a Legacy Doomsday expert, but in Vintage it's like some restricted cards like Narset, Ancestral Recall. I didn't think about those, but I did think about Wasteland and Collector Roof.
I mean, also Wasteland, Collector Roof, Endurance, um, and yeah, like all these cards are very good. I think, I think the main thing that I've sort of from this conversation is just people just take time. It's fine to take time. Don't panic. It's fine. And sort of, I think one thing I've always admired about you, Andres, is that you think of this very holistically. And I think a lot of players could take a sort of leaf out of that book of just like, if you think of it as sort of like this kind of journey rather than just like, I have to go to, it's short term versus long term. It's just like, if you think of it more long term, life gets a lot easier.
Yeah,
It's
I,
not.
I, I would say so. You set yourself up for failure a lot less times, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Um, Sarah, do you have anything else for our wonderful guest? I think
I think we have mostly covered everything.
we have mostly
Um,
covered everything.
yeah, I think
Um,
there's been a lot of really important stuff talked about. I'm just going to quickly talk about something that's on the same topic as well, just because I've gotten really introspective now, and I thank you both for this. Um, I think it's something that I've found more difficult as I've transitioned, actually, because I feel like beforehand, when I was presenting myself as kind of the stereotypical cocky male Magic player, I didn't care about, taking too much time on a decision
Mm,
because it was a space where I felt comfortable.
yeah,
Whereas now there's kind of like a social pressure to
yeah,
keep things
I can see that
moving.
for sure.
And yeah, I think that's just something I need to come to peace with in myself. I've had a friend actually, Danny, friend of the channel. They has literally started saying to their opponents that they sat down, "Lovely to meet you, great to meet you. I'm going to be really unfriendly during the game because I just need to be able to think. It's not about you. I just need to be cold and just yes, no. No chatting during the games because otherwise I won't play my best."
Yeah,
And then before the game, they're lovely. When they're shuffling, they're lovely. But when they're taking game actions, they are just cold and
yeah,
focused because that's what they needed to do to play their best Magic.
yeah,
And now
yeah.
they're top eighting MODO challenges and qualifying for every RC easily.
What a gamer! What a gamer
Yeah,
Danny Thompson is.
and I just think I need to take something like that and just sit there and go, yeah, I need to do something like that. I need to offset that pressure because I'm trying to have it both ways. I'm trying to be the nicest person you've ever sat over from
yeah.
and also a cold magic machine when you can't have both.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
yeah,
I fully am aware that I am not a cold magic machine, but what I am is I can still chat, but my brain is still doing the work. And then when players come up to me and they're like, "Sahar, you're being really quiet," it's like because I'm trying to concentrate.
Yeah,
And they're like, "Why are you concentrating? Aren't you just playing this?" I'm like, "No, I have to actually think occasionally." And I think I actually sometimes think it is sometimes harder for some players. I think it is one of those challenges, but I think Modo kind of does eradicate that as much because you don't know who your opponents are. Although I think that all content creators who make magic content for Modo should just say they. Please say they. They is very good, folks. Just say they. You don't know, or opponent. You don't know who your opponent is. Just say opponent.
if you're winning, it's he. If you're losing, it's she.
Yeah, that's the thing I used to hate when I watched content. They were like, "Oh, no, just," and then but we
no, but I think
digress.
it's a good point to find your own way of how you thrive at a magic table and be confident about that it's going to be different for each person.
Mm-hmm.
Someone likes to be super friendly, but if you realize that you're friendly and then it kind of hurts your own concentration or whatever,
Yeah,
but you are very friendly, you're just not able to be that in that moment, then announcing stuff like that that sounds useful
yeah, yeah,
because it kind of lets go of the bad like what's it called, when you internally you kind of feel bad you can't be both.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
That's super reasonable. Sometimes when I have some stuff to do on the side, on Magic Online, I'll go, "Hey, have a nice match. I might be a little slow because of whatever. Maybe I mentioned the reason. Maybe I don't. It's just it's okay to announce what the opponent can expect from the match, if that makes sense."
yeah,
yeah.
100%.
Communication cures a lot of these things in
Yeah,
general. And yeah, I'm going to note one more cool little thing from chess just because I thought of it. Because we've mentioned the difference between online and paper play. There's an equivalent difference in chess of over the board and then online play. And there's this concept called stereotype threat, which is that people will play worse when they're culturally expected to be worse at something. So the example they give is scholastic chess, kids playing chess against each other. Girls, when they play against other girls, play objectively stronger chess than when they play against boys because they've been brought up to believe that boys are better at chess. And so what happened was when COVID happened and everything moved online, all the girls' ratings went up because they could no longer see who their opponent was.
Right.
And I think taking control of that in yourself and coming up with a method to let yourself play your best, if that's what you want out of it, and we've talked about playing with purpose, maybe you do just want to go down and have a laugh and sling cards. But coming up with a method to deal with it, like how Danny has, I think is the honest solution to the problem of just objectively going, I cannot do this in my goals if I do this, which is what I want to do socially. So I'm going to distinguish between two different events. You've got the social events where I'll just be happy, and then you've got the serious events where I'm going to greet my opponent and say, this is how it's going to be because it has to be.
There's also the other extreme of that where you're just very chatty and like I have definitely done it at tournaments where I know I'm annoying my opponent because I am that chatty. I'm just like because I think one of my favorite phrases at competitive events, especially when I've been playing Legacy and they ball me, I'm like, is it good? And they're like, sometimes they'll say yes, and I'm like, well, you didn't have to say anything, but sure. Because for me, I am fully aware that I am like an exception rather than the rule to a normal Magic player. Like I am very chatty, I'm very like animated and like bantering or whatever, and like that sometimes gets opponents. And like if opponent says to me, you know what, like if Danny did that to me, I'd be like, absolutely fine, Habibi, don't worry about it, and I will play my game and we'll be absolutely living above. But if someone is like, responds in that way, then 100% we're going to have a good time, because also Magic's about having fun. If you're not having fun, what are you doing? Make sure you have fun. Same with online. And I think for us making content, it's like if you're not enjoying yourself, then why are you doing it? This is the whole thing, folks. Magic is a fun hobby. Don't make it so it's not becomes like not a good hobby, and then you're just like, why am I doing this? And then we're back to the start of like, is it fun or is it addiction? Let's find out together. So I think those are kind of the things. Final point, Andreas. Currently, you're known for playing multiple formats. Vintage, Legacy, Pauper, Cube, whatever's available on Magic Online, I will play it. Is there I think Sarah mentioned this earlier, but I kind of want to bring up, is there something that you're like, you should play these formats to get better at a certain thing? I know we said about limited with combat maths, but like for me, I got told by Vintage players, you will get much better at patience and knowing when to pick your fight in Vintage, because if you can get past the first early turns, then it's really interactive and really fun. Do you kind of subscribe to that, or do you think that it's not necessarily about formats, but just like the way people play Magic, that you can pick and choose, different formats give you different things that you can then kind of improve yourself as a Magic player?
Yeah, I think in general, there's a good point that the older the format is, the more condensed the important decisions are. Mm-hmm. So around, especially the first few turns of the game.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that. And I think it kind of depends on your goals. If you want to be able to play multiple formats, you should play different decks in those formats from different point of views. Whether it's like testing, setting up a friend, like, hey, can you play some kind of top 5 decks of the formats? I really want to try this out and see if it's like anything for me. So I think it has to do with your ambition. If you just love casting Black Lotus, then there's no reason to start casting Thraben Inspector and Pauper. But if you like both ends of the spectrum, I mean, go for it. So you're not supposed to take a bigger bite than you can chew either, because playing like 6 formats and not really being well versed in any of them is maybe not going to lead to the best feeling as well. So you don't have to play multiple formats for just the sake of doing it. So how big is how much room do you have in your stomach? And then you order your meal accordingly, I would say.
That is true. But Andreas, if you had to rank your formats, end of the conversation. All right, rank the formats. You can Cube it's its own format, I imagine. We can put Cube its own format, not limited. We can put Cube. All right, top 5.
Yeah,
Because
so
we have our top 5 currently.
it's definitely vintage cube for me.
Vintage Cube's number 1.
The play experience combined with the people I get to play with is just off the charts.
That's true. You do get to play with like the best of the best. That is very true.
That is something that's very appealing to me. And then vintage, that was my first format when I was a kid. I bought my first Power 9 when I was 16. I looked up to the big boys at the store. So vintage was my first format. So that's always going to be very close to my heart. That's definitely second.
Yeah.
And then I think it's Legacy. I was one of we were 6 guys starting weekly Legacy in Copenhagen, where I'm from. And that is still thriving. They still play Legacy on Tuesday. So I'm proud of that for sure, along with our boy Tue. We were one of the pioneers of putting Legacy on the map back in the day.
We love Tue.
So that's number 3. After that, it must be, I think it's Pauper. I enjoy playing against and with all decks in Pauper, aside from something like blue-green. I play 10 fogs in my deck. I'm looking to mill you out.
Turbo fog. Yeah.
I really don't like playing against that deck or with it for that matter. So
it's very boring.
I like all the other matches.
I got credited with killing a local pauper scene because I kept turning up with like Flickertron, Turbo Fog.
And that was the same. The Stone something.
Dignitary.
Same thing for me. I loved all other decks like Fairy, Burn, Affinity. I love all other decks, just not those 2.
Yeah, I used to play Mono Black Control, was what I ended up playing back when that was like more of a deck than it is now. I think Golgari Gardens is kind of
Black Green now is like the closest thing to it. I love all that grindy stuff. I just don't like the hey, you can't attack. Hey, now you can't attack.
You just can't do anything. Yeah, you're just like I'm
And then
stuck.
What do we have left here? I guess we have Pioneer and Modern left.
Yeah, you got standard as well down here.
Yeah,
pre-modern, old school. We can keep naming formats.
In Pioneer, I like to play Arc like Phoenix, and Modern, I used to play it a lot. It looks like it's very top heavy these days. Very little room for brewing. Just looking from the outside. Yeah. But I like the new Junt deck that I saw from I think Karate Dome played a pretty awesome Junt deck. That looked like just a collection of good cards and then 4 seismic assaults.
Just get in. Yeah. I think, obviously for us, it's obviously Legacy is number 1. Legacy definitely is always number 1.
Makes sense. Otherwise, you were in for a name change.
Yeah. I mean, we love vintage too.
For me, it's like Legacy, Vintage, Pauper, Modern, Standard, and then Pioneer at the very bottom for me.
I think mine goes Legacy, Vintage Cube, because I play Vintage Cube semi-regularly at home. And then it sort of depends what I'm playing, because it might be Modern. I do love
Creativity or Scapeshift. I'll put those on the table. Then it's Modern.
This is where me and Andreas are very similar. We're like, can we play Creativity or can we play Scapeshift? If yes, then we will register Modern.
Then
if
Modern.
No, then we're like out of here. Just
rockets up the rankings.
Exactly. We're just like
I loved 5-color Creativity when that was like the best deck. That was.
I went to a modern. I went to a Modern tournament. I hadn't played Creativity. I played maybe a league with it. When 1-4. Went to a modern tournament with Creativity. Went 6-3 and was like Creativity for 2. They were like concede. I'm like, I haven't done anything. Just cast it too much.
Yeah,
it's like when I played Scapeshift. When I was playing Scapeshift for the first time, and I played against Affinity. This is when Affinity was still a deck. Rest in peace, Mox Opal. And my opponent plays an Edge champion, and I'm like, cool. I go Scapeshift, and I remember calling the judge and was like, "Judge, what color of damage is Valakut?" Yeah. And they're like. So you're in a competitive rules enforcement tournament. How do you not know what? I was like, I don't know, Judge. Just tell me. And he's like, it's colorless. Okay, can I kill the Edge champion? Like it says protection from. I was like, kill this Edge champion and then kill them.
That
thing
works.
that killed my love of Affinity was the Devoid board wipe when my Edge champions couldn't beat Jund players anymore because they could
Kozilek's return.
Yeah, Kozilek's return. Yeah, again, Modern was a much different time than it is now. But once a year, I get Scapeshift out I dust off Scapeshift and I play it. And every time I play it online, I remember Ragavan exists, and then we put it back in the box, and we're like, but I just want to cast Brink to Light and just do the thing. And no, Creativity is the closest thing I can do. On that note, folks. Andreas, obviously, where can people find you on the internet? Obviously, you have just started a YouTube channel, which I'm very excited by.
Yeah, that's been a lot of fun. So ecobaronenMTG is a place where I'll upload vintage cube, legacy, vintage gameplay, hopefully coupled with some of my thoughts about the game that I'm trying to stand out a little bit. I'm not too worried about winning, but luckily I have been doing a lot of winning, so I guess I'm doing a little bit of both on the channel so
Yeah, we
far.
love winning.
Learning and winning. The best combination.
It is literally the best combination because they're learning and winning during these trying times. And of course, for, if you folks, if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, all that fun jazz, algorithmic gods, all that fun stuff. And Sarah will be back with more A to Z. I think we're going to continue on the letter F. We've got through C and we've got through E. We're going to play F, and then F, G, H are going to be fairly easy, like simple videos. And then we get to like I, and then we have to look at Infect and be like, okay, fun times.
Infect was like my first proper legacy deck. I'm looking forward to it.
I know.
We have to get
through
brainstorm and you kill people in one.
That is true. It is true. We'll have some fun videos on that. So until next time, folks, keep playing, enjoying Legacy. I hope this video has helped you learn and level up maybe a tiny little bit. And just keep playing Legacy. So it is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from Sarah and Andreas. Bye, guys. Bye.
Everyone, thanks for having me.